to give water to the plants and so on. And I'd like to welcome every one of you here this morning on behalf of Skilton House Ministries. This is the second of two debates. The participants are listed on the front page of the program that you have. Dr. Richard Weisenberg and Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo. And we do plan on having some refreshments. Perhaps already you've participated in that, and presumably there may be some refreshments when this is over as well. And we also have a number of displays out there in the hallway, and we encourage your involvement in that. In the programs, hopefully you received a 3x5 card, and we were inundated with questions from last evening. We did not cover, maybe we only went through about 20% of those questions. I would encourage you to hold the card this way rather than this way. Don't fill it out yet. Just one question, if you can make it brief and to the point, that would be super, and also legible. If you would like to have the question answered, and you're not sure that it will be answered, feel free to put your address and your name and so on in the back. But otherwise, we'll just receive the cards. And it went pretty well last evening, and there was interest in the questions and so on. And probably between section C and D, or actually between D and E, we may receive those cards. So I would encourage you to wait until you've heard both initial presentations before formulating a question, and direct it to a specific person. Keep that name on the same side as the question, and we will be alternating between the speakers after the initial part. And we do express appreciation to Westminster Theological Seminary for the use of these facilities. And if you are interested in videos, the videotapes, you can talk to the people at the tables following the session this morning. And I also appreciate very much the respect that the debaters yesterday were accorded. But again, let me remind you, please refrain from cheering, applauding, and or other outward form of approval and or disagreement. Following the debates, we encourage you to greet the debaters and even ask questions as time allows. And the people did take advantage of that last evening. And I think that there was overall a very fine spirit. I will have a few other things to say later on, but we want to get started very soon. I am not going to repeat what was written in the brochures that many of you received concerning the backgrounds of our two guest debaters this morning. Their names are on the front of the program, and the question that is being addressed, responded to, is on the front, namely the statement, evolution is scientific, ? Creation is unscientific, ? And the answer, yes, Dr. Weisenberg, and no, Dr. Mastropaolo. And so that will be the order of the presentations. And Dr. Weisenberg will have up to 30 minutes to present the affirmative to those questions. Dr. Weisenberg.
Oh, that is on. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming and giving up your Saturday mornings to, listen to the two of us, and hopefully we'll have some impact on you. I'm a little bit actually taken aback because I sort of assumed I would go second, but the way you worded the question, you're right, I should go first. So here I am. So my job here is, of course, to convince you, since this is a debate, of the correctness of my particular point of view. And I understand that that's a difficult challenge, and that, in fact, I'm not even sure that that is my task. I think my task really is to get you thinking about certain things, thinking about certain issues, and whether or not, in fact, opinions change, ideas change. Well, that'll be something that might happen down the road. So let me talk about principle of evolution by natural selection. It's been around for a while, all right, about 150 years in the form that Darwin first proposed it. It's been under attack for all of those years by various parties. It has survived and prospered as a scientific principle. Okay? It's with us today, stronger than ever. For example, just this morning I was thinking about this, and I grabbed the issue of the journal Nature. This is one of the most reputable scientific journals. This is from a few weeks ago, 29 March issue. And I just went through it pretty quickly and tried to pick out references to evolution. Right? This is a general scientific journal. It deals with science of all types, physics, chemistry, astronomy. So here's an article called Caterpillar-Induced Nocturnal Plant Volatiles Repel Conspecific Females. That one's exciting, right? Reference here, it says that the regulation of these compounds, this is the part I marked. Oh, okay. Excuse me. Transmit information to herbivores and expands our view of tritrophic systems and is significant with regard to our understanding of the selective pressures governing the evolution of such signals. So they're interpreting their data on caterpillar-induced nocturnal plant volatiles with respect to evolution. That was just one. There's also a series of articles, 2 articles on the evolution of Chinese salamanders. And Chinese salamander evolution is of not a great interest to me, but it was apparently of enough interest to get a News and Views article, special treatment in the journal, showing how the salamanders have evolved. And there's, of course, the actual article, which shows the pictures of the fossils, the actual fossil images of the salamanders from the late Jurassic, which is dating back about 65, well, it's actually late Jurassic, that should be about 65 million years ago. So that's more evolution. And then there's other articles in here. There's a review of a book on the actual collection of fossils, pictures of folks who actually collect fossils and study the fossils. Some of the politics behind the evolutionary battle, which in science, of course, almost everything is a battle between the ideas of different folks and how those issues are being resolved, particularly with respect to human evolution. An interesting book review. This one is called a book review of Emotion, the Science of Sentiment. It's about emotion. And what's that got to do with evolution? Well, here's the statement. The strength of Darwinian approach is to sweep aside individual differences in an effort to highlight universals. So even in an article, about psychology, about emotions, reference to the use of Darwinian principles of evolution. And analysis of human origins, article on the evolution of human origins looking at mitochondrial DNA and a plot of what that tells us about the origin of mankind. And finally, and actually I think this is interesting, some corrections. Corrections. In science, things correct themselves. There's a constant, people publish things, sometimes mistakes are made, sometimes data changes. So there are actually 2 corrections, one on genetic control and evolution of sexually dimorphic characters. This is about the evolution of why men and, males and females look different. The correction is just simply the omission of an author. And the other is mitochondrial genome variation in the origin of modern humans, and the correction was a technical detail in the sequence data. And I do that just to point out to you that evolution is embedded into modern thinking, modern biological thinking. Has been for decades, for roughly, well, I mean, really 150 years. I want you to think about the following. Suppose for a minute that God herself should appear. And God, by the way, is a she, I believe. And God herself should appear. And in some manifestation, say, I created it all. I created the birds and the bees and the flowers and the humans. And I created the fossils. And I carefully placed the fossils in layers, right, with rocks that can be dated by radioactive isotopes. And I created unique organisms on islands, so that different islands, even close together, like in the Galapagos, have different unique species. And I created the DNA sequences and arranged them so they seem to indicate patterns of inheritance. That's great, God. I mean, you did a fantastic job. And it will not change what science does. Right? Evolution will continue to be the tool, the principle by which we understand the world around us. Okay? And that gets me really to my main theme. You know, evolution doesn't need defending. That's what scientists use, what biologists use on a day-to-day basis. The issue before us, in my opinion, is the nature of creationism. And whether it's a science, or whether it's not a science. Okay? And what I want to deal with, actually, are two issues. One is, of course, the one that's under debate. Is it a science? There's a simple answer to that. And that is testable predictions. Does creationism make testable predictions? All right? No, and other discussions I've had with creationists, I've made a promise, a commitment. And I'll make this to my colleague and to anybody else here. You go out and you show me, for example, in a rock that contains dinosaur bones, any sign, any convincing sign that's, you know, really, well, it's one that can't be argued. There's some claims, but they're not very convincing. You show me in that rock that contains dinosaur fossils that dates to, say, 65 million years ago, according to radioactive isotope decay. And you show me any human remains, or not even a human remain, any higher mammal, any dog, any cat, any primate, because they evolved after the dinosaurs disappeared. And I'll become a creationist. Or show me, I can take you up to the Catskills where there's fossil beds of trilobites dating to about 500 million years ago. Show me a bony fish. Show me a fossil of anything that has a backbone in those rocks. I'll become a creationist. Okay? That's the challenge to the creationists. If they want to be a science, they have to make predictions, and those predictions have to be testable. They really don't do that. What the creationists do, by and large, is attack evolution based upon some notion or another, and we're going to hear, I suspect, some of those attacks today. They're interesting. The arguments that you will get from creationists regarding the probability, for example, that life might have emerged or could evolve, arguments about the second law of thermodynamics, arguments about irreducible complexity. These are interesting. In fact, they're interesting challenges to us in science because we have to respond to them. And I will let him, my colleague, tell us why he thinks evolution can't be true, and we'll see if I can respond adequately. But that's not the issue. It's not enough to attack evolution. You have to do something positive. You have to provide a positive guide to understanding the world around us if you're going to be taken seriously as a science. Now here's actually what generally happens when creationists talk. They will attack evolution based upon some notion. Zen, second law of thermodynamics, probability arguments, all right? Complexity arguments. And they'll say evolution can't be true. Therefore, what do? They invoke miracles. All right? That is to say, their solution to the impossibility, in their opinion, of evolution is something that's outside the realm of science, a miracle, creation. Now here's my view on this. First of all, that's bad science. It's not even science. It doesn't even rise to the level of science. All right? But this is something that I think I want to really emphasize. It's also, in my opinion, bad theology. Okay? Let's think about this. You know and I know, let's be honest about this, that this debate comes out of fundamental Christianity. It comes from a reading of scriptures of the Bible. All right? There's no debate about other scientific principles that scientists follow and believe. All right? Those principles are accepted by everybody, including Christianity. The debate on evolution is a debate that begins with a literal interpretation of the Bible and of Genesis. Let's not kid ourselves. And the people who promote creationism as a science have fundamentally a background in Christianity and fundamental Christianity. But it's not good Christianity. It's not good theology. You know, we're in a seminary here, and I think it's appropriate to discuss that. Let me tell you a little story that I got involved in. It actually happened to me some years ago. I was a college student. I had a roommate who was a born-again Christian. And he used to read the Bible every night. Drove me nuts. And I said to him one day, I said, you know, you can interpret that Bible any way at all. I mean, you can just, you know, it's open to all kinds of interpretation. He said, oh yeah, prove it. So I opened up the Bible, and pretty much a chance I wound up in Revelations. Because trust me, I'm not a Bible reader. I'm not a Bible scholar. And I picked it up, and the fifth angel sounded. It said, this is the opening of the seventh seal. And he opened the bottomless pit. And there arose a smoke out of the pit. I'm sort of skipping through here. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. And it was given unto them power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was given that they should not kill them, that is, the men without the seal of God, but that they should torment them 5 months. And describe these locusts. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings were as the sound of chariots and many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And I said to my roommate, oh, I can interpret that. This is back in the 1960s, by the way, at the height of the Cold War. Shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, I believe. Oh, that's easy to interpret. That's an image of nuclear war. This rose smoke out of the pit. That's a silo. That's a missile silo. And these locusts, that's an image. You know, whoever saw this image had to interpret that image. And 2,000 years ago, they didn't know about ICBMs. These locusts, they had breastplates of iron. Well, yeah, but then what they saw was missiles, not breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings is a sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Well, yeah, ISIS would think so. Sound of a ICBM coming out of a silo. All right? And of course, the power to hurt men for 5 months, make them wish for death. Radiation poisoning, sure. And he looked at me, and I paused, and I said, oh my God, that's scary. Now, the point of that, I don't think most Christians, even fundamentalists, believe we're going to be attacked by a horde of armor-plated locusts. I really don't think that would be a sensible interpretation. Maybe it's an interpretation that I made, that it represents nuclear war. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. That's for theologians to argue about. But come on, we would not reasonably say, oh yes, we have to watch out for those armor-plated locusts, the ones with the faces of men and the blonde hair, as I remember. No, the Bible cannot and should not be interpreted literally. Bad theology. And it applies to Genesis, I believe. And I would say also to the creationists, show me in the Bible, show me in your theology, where it says that God operates outside of natural law, that God creates outside of natural law. Where does it say that? Why do we invoke this creation mechanism? And as we do it, and this is the unscientific part of creationism, if they want to have a creationist model, don't throw out natural law. Tell me how God does it using natural law. And I believe, in fact, we could perhaps do that. I want to actually do something for you. I have a demo here. Evolution, as you, I hope, know, depends upon variation in the organisms. Variations created by mutation. All right? In a world without mutation, there's no variation, there's no evolution. Organisms, you know, in an imagined world in which the life is created, poof, like that, why would you even have mutation? You wouldn't want organisms to change. You want them to be constant. Organisms do change. They mutate. You are capable of mutation. Quite possible. In fact, we're going to listen together to what I call the creative voice of God. And I have here a way of listening to that voice. It's a Geiger counter. This Geiger counter detects cosmic rays. Cosmic rays are one of the big mysteries, by the way, of science. They come from somewhere out in the universe, from an unknown source, a high energy. And every click you hear, let's just listen to this for a minute. Every one of those clicks is a high energy cosmic ray. It comes from outer space someplace, big mystery. But I tell you what they can do. This is fact, this is science. Those cosmic rays can hit your DNA, your genes, and they can alter your genes. They can mutate your genes. And it's through those mutations, and the simple fact, and this is a fact, that organisms compete in this planet. They compete for resources, for food, for territory, for mates. And as they vary, as they change through these mutations, some organisms become better fit, better adapted, better able to eat, to reproduce, to avoid predators, and they leave progeny that are in turn altered. And you do that over a few 100 million years, or if you like, a few billion years, and you can most certainly create the diversity of life on Earth. I think I'm probably near the end of my time, right? No? Oh, heavens. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap up what I wanted to say anyway. If creationists want to be accepted as scientists, They have to do more than just criticize evolutionary biology. They have to provide an alternative framework within the realm of natural law. All right? That's a requirement for science. It's not enough to invoke miracles. That's not going to give us predictions. You can't simply say, life is what it is because, well, God created it that way. Sorry. It doesn't cut it as a science. You've got to tell me, you got to give me some tools for understanding why islands have different species, why the DNA has the structure it does, why the fossils are laid down in the order they are. That's the requirement for the creationists. Finally, I want to say one other thing. I notice there's several young people in the audience, which is great. And there's something that bothers me about this, and that is what we do here is create a false dichotomy between religion and science. This is not healthy. It's not healthy for religion. It's certainly not healthy for science. It's not good for science to have this debate constantly going on in which sound science which has been confirmed over and over and over again for over 100 years, gets challenged in the schools on the basis of the most frivolous kind of arguments. It's not good for science. And it's certainly not good for religion. It is certainly not good to say our young people, well, you have to choose. You have to choose between your religion and your God and your Bible and between science and the knowledge that science has provided to make our world better. And it has. It has made our world much better. That's not good. It's not good for either party. And so I would say, we're going to have this debate. I expect there'll be more debates, but frankly, I wish the debate would end. In the world of science, the debate ended long ago. And I would hope that in the world of religion and theology, that debate also will end. And I think I thank you with that. I'll turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Weisenberg. And now we'll turn our attention to Dr. Mastropaolo.
For this debate, Professor Weisenberg has argued evolution is scientific, creation unscientific. I'm going to present evidence that evolution is unscientific, creation is scientific. Furthermore, the evidence will demonstrate evolution is non-existent. There is no evidence for it. Evolution is an occult religion. It is a state-supported occult religion. It violates, therefore, the U.S. Constitution. It promotes biosphere extinction, which is the summit of criminality. And on the basis of the evidence, not arguments, but evidence, evolution must be expunged worldwide. Now these are dictionary definitions of create. To cause, to come into existence, make, originate, especially make or design something requiring art, skill, or invention. Art, for example, the Mona Lisa, or skill and invention like this Ford automobile. And if we say that Leonardo da Vinci created the Mona Lisa, or Henry Ford created the Ford, we don't ascribe to either one of those gentlemen any kind of divinity. That's the proper use of the word create. Devolution, the biological definition, is a progression of structures toward greater simplicity or disappearance. Degeneration, the arrow points downward. We can say that this skull belonged to some kind of living organism. It died. Death is devolution. It putrefied. That is a movement from complex molecules, like proteins, down to simple elements. That is devolution. These things we can say with certainty. Everything else is speculation. Now, according to Webster, evolution, the biological definition, is development of an organism from its primitive state to its present state. So, for example, if the evolutionist would like to go from nothing to an element in the periodic table, that would be evolution. Or from this element to simple bacteria or protozoa or other simple organisms, that would be evolution. Or to higher animals, that would be evolution. The arrow points upward. It goes from simple to complex. In order to get from the simple to the complex, you need an almost infinite number of miracles. And I want to emphasize that. Miracles. So when we talk about religion, we're talking about evolution as the biggest religion, the biggest fairy tale that's ever been told. Now, are these things created or did they evolve? This watch, this airplane, this locomotive, building, and so on. These statues, this cave painting, clothing, implements for hunting. Humans create everything. They evolve nothing. All of you in this auditorium are creationists, no matter what you say, because you evolve nothing. These animals, the den for the beaver, the chrysalis for the monarch, the nest for the fish and for the bird, and these shells and webs and apartment houses for 1 million individuals, air-conditioned, all created. Animals create everything. They evolve nothing. Created or evolved. Plants create all of these things, including flowers. I didn't put a lot of flowers in there, but they are very special. Plants create everything. Plants evolve nothing. Now, I hope that covers the biosphere for us. And what we see is everything in the biosphere is created, nothing evolved. Now, each black dot is a galaxy. And we're looking at the universe from the planet Earth, and this is the way it would look. And we need to ask, are any of the things out there in all of these galaxies created or evolved? Is there evolution anywhere in the universe? And the answer is nothing out there in any of these galaxies is evolving. Nothing. Everything is devolving. And if it's there, it means it was made. And that is the definition for created. So everything out there was created, and it is devolving. Nothing is evolving. Now that covers the entire universe. And we can see from our biosphere to every galaxy in the universe, we see nothing except creation and devolution. And devolution excludes evolution. They are exactly the opposite. The evidence states evolution is, has been, always will be, non-existent. What exists was created. Why is evolution the phantom of the universe? Well, I thought I would at least get a smile. And the answer is the laws of physics. My learned colleague would like us to stick with natural laws. This is natural law. I have summarized a great deal of it by saying, let's put 100 units of electricity into this bulb. We will get out 10 units of light. Now what I've done is I have put in 100 units of available energy, and what I got out was 10 units of available energy. That going from 100 to 10 is devolution. It is not evolution. And when I lose 90 units of heat, these are lost for any other kind of energy conversion. That is devolution. I have lost that what used to be available energy. So what we find then is that in every event in this universe, we get devolution. We never get evolution. And we devolve not only the energy, but we also devolve anything with mass. And notice that I have put down here a bulb with a missing part of the filament. The mass is missing. It can't work anymore. What that means is the bulb is dead, just like any of us will be in the future. That's what happens to individuals and to populations. It's called extinction. So we can put in the energy and nothing happens anymore. Just like we can put energy into a dead body and you can't make it move anymore. It's been devolved. And that's all that happens in the universe. And the reason that it happens that way is the laws of physics, and we can't do anything about changing them. We can't pass any new laws of physics. Now, you know how academics are. They like to say things in Latin. Natura semper scalus descendat. Nature always goes downstairs. Nature never goes upstairs. Devolution always happens. Evolution never happens. And that's why evolution is the phantom of the universe. What we have here is superstitious, spontaneous generations which come to us from evolution, and we can find them in the work of Aristotle about 2,300 years ago. He taught that spontaneous generations made eels. You don't have to do anything. Just by themselves, boom, eels will occur. And what the interesting thing is, in public school biology today, it teaches that spontaneous generations made all living things. That's what our students are being taught in their biology classes today. And I'll prove that to you in just a little while. Evolution is superstition. That's what it amounts to. It is a modern form, or what should I say? It's an ancient form of superstition in modern robes. Now here is right out of a biology book, published in 1998. Biology, Visualizing Life. Soon after the earth became hospitable to living things, life arose in the ancient seas. The first organisms to appear on the planet were bacteria. They are these early bacteria, the ancestors of modern bacteria, and of all the many different kinds of organisms living today, including you. And that is meaning the students that are reading the book. Now, how did they get from nothing to the first biological organism? Spontaneous generation. It happened all by itself. How did you get from one to the other? Spontaneous generation. Happened all by itself. And how did you get from simple one cells to trillions of cells? Spontaneous generation. Happened all by itself. And this is from a biology book, and you can find it in one after the other of the biology books. Now, just in case there's any doubt, Spontaneous generation was proven false by Francesco Redi in 1665 with this apparatus, more rigorously by Pasteur in 1864 with this apparatus, and most rigorously by John Tyndall in 1877 with this apparatus. Those are experiments anyone can perform, and you will get the same results that those outstanding scientists obtained. And this is the thing that we're being asked to believe by the evolutionists. Somehow a simple cell, maybe like an amoeba, was spontaneously generated and spontaneously generated all the other simple cells, single-celled organisms. There are more than 30,000 of them. And that requires an almost infinite number of miracles for each individual organism, and practically an infinite number of miracles to go horizontally. Going vertically, we have millions of organisms going from simple cells to trillions of cells, and that requires an almost infinite number of miracles to go in the direction of complexity. So whether we're going in diversity or complexity, which are both definitions of evolution, we require almost infinite miracles. When we're talking about miracles, I'm glad that my learned colleague mentioned that, we're talking about religion. And that's what evolution is. It's religion. Now here's the direct experimental evidence. The requirement for science is that an experiment be successful 95 times out of 100. Dr. Darwin, Charles Darwin's grandfather, had, according to rumor, a vermicelli experiment. You people know what vermicelli is. It's pasta, right? He supposedly could bring that pasta to life. I've tried that. It failed 100% of the time. You try it. See if you can make it work. I couldn't. Charles Darwin said salts and electricity would generate the first cell. I tried it. 100% failures. You try it. See if you can make it work. Ernst Haeckel said, go get some sea slime and you'll find these monera. He invented this term. And you'll see them reproducing. That was forgery. Those monera were made of sulfate of lime, and you can't get sulfate of lime to move or reproduce or do anything that living things do. Stanley Miller used some kind of precursors to amino acids in a spark and boiled it. Did he get any cells? 100% failures. Yockey tried simulation and found that evolution was impossible. The ones who say that carbon is self-organizing, that's 100% failures. Carbon will diffuse, it won't self-organize. Perpetual motion machines would work if evolution were true. They're 100% failures. Now how about devolution? There are trillions of experiments, all 100% successful. And yet we have evolution in the schools that never works, and devolution which always works and is never permitted in the schools. Completely censored. Evolution is superstition, devolution is science. Any existing structure is a creation because it could not evolve or spontaneously generate. Evolution and spontaneous generation are impossible. Therefore, everything that we see in existence is a creation. But we have these miracles. We have to help our evolutionist colleagues somehow account for these miracles. How can we do it? Remember, on the primitive Earth, it says in Miller and Levine, their 2000 edition of their biology book, on the primitive Earth, it happened. First cell, and then the evolution, and so on. It happened on the primitive Earth. Well, what was on the primitive Earth? According to legend, the great mother of the gods of humans and nature, Sibylla, Rhea in some cultures, or Gia in other cultures, she's the goddess of evolution. I looked her up. There she was. This was the only likeness I could find from Crete. There she is, Gia, Mother Earth, mother of Prometheus. Mary Shelley called Frankenstein the new Prometheus. What did Prometheus do? He took a lump of clay, made it look like a man, and then animated it. So according to Greek mythology, Prometheus was the innovator of human beings, of living things. And she is the mother of Prometheus. So Mary Shelley believed that Frankenstein's monster would work because of what she heard about Dr. Darwin, Charles Darwin's grandfather, and his vermicelli experiments, and what she read from the German physiologists. She thought that you could get spare parts, sew them together, electricity, and bang, a living organism. So who worked the infinite number of miracles? Sibylla, the state-supported occult pagan religion that we have presently in the biology books in virtually every high school and university in the United States today. And that, in my estimation, is the greatest disgrace in modern science. The evidence indicates that evolution is, number one, non-existent, number two, an occult religion, number three, public school supported religion, four, therefore, in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Now, what the evolutionist needs to do is to show us, by an experiment, how to evolve the first bacterium. Here are various kinds of bacteria. We don't say, evolve this one for us. We say, take anyone. Pick one and give us the experiment. Now you might say, have mercy on these poor evolutionists. How are they supposed to know how to do this? Well, we've got photomicrographs here. We have schematics there, which give information on how to spontaneously generate all of these structures which are necessary in order for the organism to live and reproduce and feed itself and metabolize its food and so on. It is orders of magnitude easier to reverse engineer something that already works than it is to engineer the original. Don't you agree? That's the way it is in industry. I was in industry, and if anybody gave me a machine that already worked and said, reverse engineer this, figure out how it works, and let's us make it, that's a much easier task than telling me, make us a machine. Here's the blueprint and so on. Here's what we think is necessary. That's much harder to do. So the evolutionists have a real easy job. Just look at the micrographs, look at the schematics, and give us the experiment. Then once you've got one of them to work, show us how to get from one to the other. Now we're not saying you have to go from 1 to 2. You can go from 3 to 4. You can go from 5 to 6. You can pick any ones you want. Just go from one to the other, because that's what you say in the book happened and can be done. Then, when you're done with bacteria, go to protozoa. This is supposed to be the simplest. Here's a photomicrograph. Here's a schematic. Here are some of the structures that are in protozoa. Got plenty of information. Show us how to do it. Give us the experiment. While you're at it, show us how to make a flagellum. Simple, propeller-like, outboard motor kind of mechanism that many of these bacteria and protozoa have that help the organism get from here to there. Show us, if you can't do the whole thing, then at least show us how to do the outboard motor part. While you're at it, there are 4 kinds. Show us how to do each one. When you're done with that, show us how to do cilia. Here's a paramecium, has 2,500 cilia, beating in time. They're going exactly right so that that little organism swims through the water. Show us how to do that. Only 2,500 on that little beast. And then explain to us why you have to do things like this. Why we have to have in biology textbooks homologous structures which are false. Neck of the giraffe, which is false. Peppered moths, which was forged. Embryos mimicking evolution, which was forged. Common ancestor, false. Apes to humans, false. Ape men, Piltdown, Nebraska, forged. Sickle cell advantage, false. The Monera cell, forged. Life from the sea, false. Molecular clock, false. Dino bird, forged. Lamarckism, false. Darwin's pangenesis is absolutely silly. I won't take the time to explain it to you because you'll be laughing. And vestigial organs are also false. And when you look at the list and you understand what is being put in the books, you would say evolution is the greatest of fairy tales. Fairy tales, incidentally, we can put a probability on. The probability is 10 to the 150th power to 1 against it. Do you know what it is for just one molecule and one protein? 10 to the 4 millionth power to 1 against it. If you call a zillion 10 to the 4 millionth power, which is a 1 followed by 4 million zeros, I'd need a stack of books this big just for the zeros. If you call that a zillion, then you can make education in the U.S. a zillion times more scientific and truthful if you throw out evolution and put in Pinocchio's blue fairy created all living things. It'll be a zillion times more scientific if you say that instead of evolution. And if you want to make it another zillion times more scientific and truthful, all you have to say is life was created. It did not evolve, and the blue fairy didn't do it either. Now you can go zillion times more truthful on that. Now here's how to win this debate. My learned colleague has told me how to win it. I'll tell him how to win it. Show this, the experiment, to obtain from nothing an element, or from an element a bacteria, or from a bacteria a protozoa, a plant, an animal, a human. This is in the biology book. They say it went from this to this to this to this to this to that. Give me one experiment that I can do that will be successful, at least 95 times out of 100. They can't do it. This is the evidence. Evolution is non-existent. Devolution is universal. Evolution is non-science. Devolution is observed science. Evolution depends upon an almost infinite number of miracles and magic. Devolution, you've got trillions of observations. You have faith in Sibylla. That's what evolution requires. You have exclusively reality for devolution. Evolution is based on the occult and magic. Devolution, 100% on experiments. Occult religion, 100% science. It violates the laws of physics. This obeys the laws of physics. This violates the Constitution. This obeys the Constitution. This is 100% in the public schools. This is 100% censored in the public schools. And you ask why? And the answer is evolution can survive only if the truth is censored. That's the reason. Put it in an academically free environment, and evolution will be laughed out of the classroom. Now, this is what has been said is the basis for evolution. Mutations. And in fact, what we find, evolution teaches mutations are advantageous. As a matter of fact, that's the way you get evolution. In fact, mutations cause death and extinctions. Here are the references. And they talk about sickle cell trait, and they say the puzzle, there's no puzzle. It has a genetic disorder number, 141,900. It causes extinctions. It causes hospitalizations, 75,000 hospitalizations of 6.1 days with significant mortality. There's no mystery about it at all. If evolution were true, this is the kind of data that we would have for infant deaths attributed to birth defects. These have been reversed, and like these data, evolution is false. I'll now show you the real data, the way they truly look. And this is the way they truly look. In other words, they're going up exponentially, and the equation fits the data with about a 96% accuracy. Where you get zero defects, go back in time. If you want to find zero defects, go forward in time, and you get not evolution, you get extinction. And if we extrapolate these data, this is what we see. We'll have 100% infant deaths attributed to birth defects by the year 2085. So don't make plans beyond the end of the century, because we may not have much longer than that. You want zero defects? Go back in time. Going forward in time, you don't have evolution, you have extinction. I think I've proven the case. And if I have not, if there is a question in anyone's mind that evolution is superstitious, occult, depending upon miracles, a Sibylese kind of religion, then please ask it in the form of a question. I'll try to answer that. But that's what evolution is. And what we have to say is that devolution is science. It's exactly the opposite. It's censored out of the schools. It's not in the biology books. They can't stand having it in the biology book. Otherwise, it would completely destroy the evolutionary argument. And so I invite you to ask it in the form of a question if you're not convinced. Thank you very much.
Just briefly, before we get into the affirmative rebuttal, to remind you that you do have a card. If you would like to write a question, I would encourage it to be directed to one person, one question, and keep it brief if possible. You do not need to hand that in at this point. After the first round of rebuttals, each speaker will have 5 minutes to give a rebuttal. And then we can collect those cards, and then we will have a second session of rebuttals. So at this point, I would like to give Dr. Weisenberg an opportunity to respond.
Can I borrow your overheads just for a minute? Or at least your book, and I'll pop the one out I need. Is that okay?
Which one did you want?
The first one.
Oh, the very first one?
Or the second. In fact, it was very early on. The one that showed the human creations there. Not that one. Not that one. The one before this. This one. No,
here's the transparency.
Oh, that's right. That's fine. Thank you much. Okay, thank you. Created or evolved? All of the objects he showed are evolved. Those objects evolved. You go back in history, so there's a time when there were no pocket watches. Some of you may recognize a pocket watch, how you even know they no longer exist. Airplanes with propellers still exist. They used to spy on China. Locomotives, they still exist, although they don't burn coal anymore. We still have plenty of skyscrapers, bridges, cameras, although now they tend to be digital. And art has certainly changed. And this is nothing like a Nike Jordan Air sneaker, but it is a shoe. It is recognizably a shoe. Evolution means change. That's all it means. It means change. And it's odd. I mean, it's sort of like I'm sort of speechless saying, things don't evolve, because change happens. And change happens in both directions, sure. Right? Absolutely. These started as very simple constructs. Then modifications were made. Some modifications worked. Some modifications were successful in the marketplace. Some modifications were not. The ones that were not went into the trash heap of history. The ones that were successful, they found a role, a place. That's what evolution is. That's what biological evolution is. Okay. He went through so many things there that I do want to, maybe address a couple issues. One of which is sort of, I've seen before in creationist argument about this probability thing. And, I wrote that. Oh, there it is. That the odds of forming a protein or something, like a single protein, when proteins are the building blocks, the things that allow your body to work, it's like astronomical figure, and it's an accurate number. It actually is an accurate number. But of course, numbers need interpretation. I brought you some. Ooh, I'm sorry. It's all dirty. I didn't know they were going. Forgot to wash them. I'll wipe it after. I'll wipe it up. I brought a bunch of rocks. You may not, see that they're rocks, but these are little pebbles I picked up in Wissahickon, walking along. Each and every one of these is an absolutely unique structure. You can go search the universe, and I can say with certainty, you will not find the exact shape or form anyplace else. The probability of any one of these being formed is vanishingly small. 1 out of 10 to the 100th power. They exist. Proteins exist. Interesting, just last week, there was an article in Nature, prestigious scientific journal, where they finally did the experiment. One of the experiments, actually, that you're sort of alluding to is this issue of forming proteins by chance. And so a group actually, created random protein structures, totally at random. About 10 to the 12th, I believe, was the number in a test tube. They just started this thing going, created a random collection of proteins, and then they looked at this collection of proteins to see if any of them had any kind of biological activity. And then they picked, in fact, binding of ATP. ATP is a crucial molecule in energy found in all cells. And they found, out of the 10 to the 12th, more than a billion, big number, they found four of these that had a biological activity, absolutely by chance. It's like winning the lottery. Your chance of winning the lottery are pretty damn poor. But you know what? Somebody's going to win the lottery. Somebody will win it. Probably won't be you, but somebody will win it. You can look at these stones again, and some of them are just like, well, they don't have any interesting shape. Somebody, give me a shape. You, the little kid there in the sweater, name a shape. What'd you say? A triangle? Let's see if I have any triangles. This one's almost a triangle. Does that look a little bit like a triangle? This one right here looks a little bit like a triangle. That's a little bit like a triangle. And so that's what, of course, evolution did. These random sequences produced by mutation produced things that were maybe not perfect triangles, but approximate triangles, close enough to be in a triangle that if we could, say, modify that a little bit over time, we'd have a better and better triangle generation, because this rock could reproduce. If it could reproduce and mutate. And then every generation, if it was like a little better triangle, we'd eventually get ourselves a nice triangle. Okay. So this probability argument, it doesn't make it. The second thing you alluded to, of course, is this classic of the second law, this de-evolution argument. And I would simply, ask you to explain to me, how is it possible that an egg, single round cell can become a human being or some other animal when over millions and millions of years that single cell could not have evolved into all these other organisms? Same kind of process. It's a process of taking energy, using the energy to produce structure. And the second law allows that, because all of these objects you saw were created using energy, right? Created using energy. I think I'll get my rocks back here. And that energy can and will do whatever you call it for. You just need a machine. You need a system, a process for taking that energy, creating structure. Now, in one sense, you're right. De-evolution is the end. The end is we're all going to be just atoms floating in the void. He gave a date. His date, I think, was the end of this century. I'm not that concerned. I think maybe it's more like about 10 billion years from now. I think we got about 10 billion years before the entropic death of the universe, before everything goes into disorder. So yeah, we're tending to disorder, but in the meantime, energy flows onto the earth from the sun, and as long as that energy flows, we can create. And I mean create in the sense of evolve. We can make new things using that energy. Does that mean I'm over my time? Okay, I'll pass it on.
I guess, Dr. Mastropaolo, you will have 6 minutes instead of 5.
I had 7 on my clock.
Oh, okay. Well,
But I'll do 6. I'll do 6. Thank you very much. I wasn't going to show you this again, but I think I need to, because I want to point out to you that every one of these things was not only created, but it was created by an intelligence. It was not evolved by no intelligence. It was not evolved by spontaneously generating something. Wait around and see how long it takes you for the bricks to be evolved and for them to assemble themselves in this order. Wait around. See how long it takes. I'm afraid that you're going to be waiting for an eternity. It will never happen. It requires engineering, which requires intelligence. Engineering requires planning and organizing and coordinating and commanding and controlling. All of these are very intellectual activities, and without them, none of these things would exist. These were all created as the dictionary uses it. And it's the same thing with those rocks that you saw. They were created. They did not evolve. They were not spontaneously generated. They were made of elements in particular configurations. And that is what creation means. I want to go forward with you to show you, because I didn't give you the whole story the first time, and that was that genetic disorders are occurring all the time in our country, in the world, and if evolution were true, this is what it would look like. The data are actually reversed, and like these data, evolution is false. So I want to show you what they really look like, and this is what they really look like. They're going up exponentially. So the infant deaths from genetic disorders are going up exponentially, and the genetic disorders in the whole population are going up exponentially. And here's the equation that fits the data with 99.5% accuracy. And I want to show you what it looks like when it's extrapolated. This is what it looks like when it's extrapolated to the year 2085. You will have 750,000 medically reported genetic disorders. Now, that is enough to supersaturate every chromosomal site in the human genome. It's enough to supersaturate. And therefore, we should not expect that those birth defect deaths are going to go down. They're going to go up as the mathematics extrapolates it. We don't have much longer to go than the end of the century. We can't go 10 billion years, ladies and gentlemen, because our sun is estimated to burn out in 5 billion years. Any of you know how to live without the sun shining? Anyone got the answer to that? I don't know how to do it. And I understand before it burns out, it's going to increase in size well beyond the orbit of the Earth. Imminent extinction is promoted by evolution. Human genetic defect mortality is accelerating to 100% by 2085. Plant and animal extinctions are approximately 30,000 a year and accelerating, and normal is 1 extinction per 4 years. That means that the present rate of extinctions of animals and plants is 120,000 times normal. The slaughter of all plant and animal life is the summit of criminality, and that's why evolution must be expunged worldwide, because it's telling us just the opposite. It's telling us we don't have to conserve the biosphere. It's telling us we don't have to restore it. It's telling us that we're going to get better with time, and in fact we're devolving. It's disarming everyone from taking action to extend the life of every life form on our planet. That is criminality. And these are my conclusions. The entire universe, including the biosphere, is a construction. The universe was created. The universe is devolving, always has, always will. Evolution is non-existent, always has been, always will be. Evolution is a state-supported occult religion. Evolution violates the U.S. Constitution. Evolution promotes human and biosphere extinction. Evolution promotes summit criminality. Evolution must be expunged worldwide. It's very simple. And if you want it in one sentence, evolution is the wishful imaginings of Anaximander and Aristotle of 2,500 years ago, based on the superstitious miracles of an almost infinite spontaneous generations worked by the goddess Sibylla in violation of the U.S. Constitution, promoting human and biosphere extinction, the summit of criminality. And that's why evolution must be expunged worldwide. Just under 1. Very good. Here's a take-home message for you. Evolution is anti-science. It's anti-life religion. It promotes human and biosphere extinction. It must be expunged worldwide. And what we need more than anything else at the moment is injunctive relief. In other words, we need to go to court to get an injunction against this occult religion which violates the U.S. Constitution. We need injunctive relief, in my estimation. Maybe you would like to know, well, perhaps I'll show that a little bit later, as to why people are promoting evolution. I'll stop right here.
Okay, before we go into the second rebuttal, 2-minute rebuttal opportunities, if you would like to pass those cards to the side aisles, there will be people receiving them, and you can just perhaps bring them up to me. Doyle, I think you might as well just bring them up to me. And during the rebuttal, the second opportunity for rebuttal, I will try to sort through some of the cards. It seemed to work out pretty well last evening. And so it'll, in fact, maybe just stand up for a minute and stretch a little bit, and just for a minute. Maybe I'll stand up. Would everyone be seated, please? I tend to be sort of a literalist, so when I say a minute, I meant a minute. And probably over a minute is gone. I realize that maybe some people had to, and we may have some people coming in, but I do want to at this time give a opportunity for a 2-minute rebuttal, and Dr. Weisenberg begins.
Well, geez, I didn't know I was a criminal. I just thought I was a scientist. In seriousness, what we really need to do, I think, in this discussion, in this debate, is ask the scientific question. And that's important. All right? How do we explain through natural processes the diversity of life on Earth, the structure, organization, nature of the fossil record, and all the other things that scientists study? Now, my colleague gave some examples of things of data, and I would point out that certainly in my evolution class, if he was taking my class, I would say to him, excuse me, you need to go back and study a little bit more about evolution. Evolution, for example, takes millions of years typically. It's a very slow process. We know that from the fossil record. We know that from the process itself. It occurs over generations. So his data, for example, on birth defects, that's over maybe a couple generations. There's no evolutionary biologist would pay any attention to that. You need generations to see any effect of evolution. He mentions, he challenges scientists to do experiments, which I'd be happy to do, say, to try and create a living organism out of nothing, which is, by the way, not evolution, that's creation. The first living cell, the origin of the first living cell, is a subject of biogenesis. It's not a subject for evolutionary biology. Evolutionary biology, I teach evolution. I spend no time whatsoever on the origin of the first living organism. It's not an issue for evolutionary biology. It's a separate issue altogether. There are many theories about how the first living cell came to be. It's not a topic for evolutionary biology. We're concerned with how those cells change over time. Yeah, I'd be glad to do the experiment, but you got to give me about, a million years, maybe 10 million years. I mean, I don't have 10 million years. What I do have is a fossil record that does cover those millions of years. And it fits. I mean, I'm sorry, that's what evolutionary biologists, one group of them, do. They go out and they collect fossils and they sort them, and that's the experiment. The experiment's there. It's been done for us over millions of years. Final word, you use the sickle cell hemoglobin example, and surely you know that the experiments have been done, the tests have been done. Carriers of sickle cell allele, the gene, are resistant to malaria. That's a benefit. That's a mutation that has a positive outcome. And we see plenty of positive mutations that didn't exist, and you can do it in any lab. You can come to a lab, we'll get you some bacteria, we'll subject them to radiation, and we'll treat them with antibiotics. Most of your bacteria will die, and if you continue that experiment, you will get resistant bacteria emerging through mutations beneficial to those bacteria. So it does happen. We have done those experiments. And I see my time is up. Thank you.
Dr. Mastropaolo?
Well, it's very interesting that we are leaning on millions of years to bring about evolution. When you look at things that have been out there for millions of years, what you find is they have devolved. Put out a statue for millions of years and you will find that it crumbles. Put out a bridge, put out anything that you can recognize. Put out a living organism, it dies and putrefies if it's animal, it rots if it's vegetable. Everything devolves. The ravages of time is in our language. It's not the building of time, it's the ravages. Ravage means everything is destroyed by time. So don't look to millions of years to bring about anything that is going to be constructed or created. It can't do it. And that's why evolution can't come up with an experiment. If you are saying that evolution should not be subjected to providing us an experiment, then what you're saying is that evolution is not science. I have reported in the journals, refereed journals, like the Journal of Applied Physiology, the European Journal of Applied Physiology, experiments. They would not permit me to publish if I did not have the experimental evidence. We have to provide experiments. We have to allow other scientists to check up on our speculations. It only becomes science when everyone can confirm it. When you say this happens, and I say, let me try it in my laboratory, and if I see it works in my laboratory, I'll believe you. But you say, oh, sorry, it doesn't work in your laboratory. Then I say to you, you're not talking to me about science. You're talking to me about a speculation. And I'm not interested in speculations. I'm only interested in science. Give me the experiment. And don't talk to me about fossils, because the laws of physics say that if anything, if you want to go from one organism to another, what you have to do is go from humans to apes, and from apes to bacteria, because that's what physics requires. Does that sound reasonable to you? Now, there was actually a scientist, Buffon, at the end of the 1700s, wrote 44 volumes on science, the scientific knowledge of the time, and his theory was that if anything, the gorilla was a degenerate man, and the ass was a degenerate horse. All right, does it sound ridiculous? Well, going the other way is even more ridiculous. Evolution is even more ridiculous because it goes against the laws of physics. It cannot happen.
I think the time is up. Okay, I think we're going to, since we just did have a period of standing up and so on, we're going to go right into the time for questions and responses and so on. And let me just remind the debaters that according to the program, the procedure is 2 and 1. The question is addressed to a debater, and the first one will be addressed to Dr. Weisenberg. And then Dr. Mastropaolo will respond, and then you'll have the last word. And then it switches for the next question. 2 and 1, 1 and 2. So I'll try to keep that in mind. And again, your opportunity is 1 to 2 minutes, initial response. Dr. Mastropaolo, 1 minute, and then about a half a minute for the last word. Okay, here is the first question. Dr. Weisenberg, could you explain the evolution of one system of the human body, the circulatory system, the reproductive system, or any system?
What, in 5 minutes? Give me a break.
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes? 2 minutes. Well, you know, that's what biologists do. I mean, you take a course, you learn about the differences between the different organisms. We can trace back in time. You can look at the human heart, and you can look over time through the fossil record, through the evolution of organisms that we know from the fossil record when they appeared on the earth. And you see the primitive heart with one chamber, and then begins, you know, starts seeing division into 2, and then 3, finally the 4-chambered human heart. So this is what evolutionary biologists do. This is what biologists do. So everything that's part of the human body that's been studied by a biologist, the human hand, the human brain, what we do, we look at the record, at our close relatives, we look at the fossil record, we look at the DNA, and one of the things we do is try and trace the history of that structure. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I'll sit down with you one-on-one afterwards, and you can ask me about the brain, the hand, the heart, and I'll do the best I can. For the record, I'm a cell biologist, really. I don't really do a lot of that. So, but I do the best I can. But that's what we do for a living in biology. Yep.
Dr. Mastropaolo.
Well, we keep getting these references, you know, to the fossils, thousands, millions of years. I just wanted to show you an ambulating fossil. That's me. The age of the Earth at my birth was 1.6 billion years old. The age of the Earth now is 4.6 billion years. The age of this fossil is 3 billion years old. And you'll notice that I am ambulating. Now that is not science. These kinds of aging processes using radioisotopes, which are not reliable, they're not valid, they're not calibrated, that is not science. And when we're speculating about millions and billions of years, that's all imagination. And what I'm saying here is we need to depend upon data, experiments, things that scientists can confirm. I'm not 3 billion years old, but if you want to believe the evolutionists, that's what you have. An ambulating fossil, 3 billion years old.
Dr. Weisenberg, the last word.
It looks 3 billion years old to me. His thinking certainly fossilized. For the record, he's just also insulted the physicists of this world, who you can look up in any table, physics, the half-life of a radioisotope. I've routinely worked with radioactive isotopes. I buy them at a certain level. If I buy P32, phosphorus 32, it's got a half-life of about 2 weeks. I can take that stuff out of the freezer. I can go to my freezer today and pull out some ancient radioactive P32, and it's hardly radioactive anymore. And I can tell you how old it is, when it was made, by the radioactivity it remains. That's physics. So, you know, he may not agree with it because it doesn't agree with his worldview, but, you know, the biologists haven't sat down and conspired with the physicists to come up with these numbers.
Dr. Mastropaolo, can you use your theory of devolution to produce seedless grapes? You ask evolutionists to create bacteria. Can devolutionists create seedless fruit without mutation?
Well, what I showed was that you can use breeding to accentuate the variability that has been designed into every organism. For example, a Chihuahua is a dog, a tiny dog. A Great Dane is a much larger dog, maybe 6 times taller. That is variability in the organism called dog. They're at opposite extremes on the bell curve. One is high, one is low. It's the same thing with horses. The Shetland is a 300-pound little horse. The Belgian is a ton heavier than that, 2,300 pounds. They're still horses. And that is the whole point. The thing that these evolutionists have been taking credit for is what is actually in the design of each organism. They take credit for that. They say that the Chihuahua evolved. It didn't evolve. It was bred that way. Bred from the variability that was built into that created organism. That's how it got that way. And likewise the Great Dane. And you will find that every dog will produce a dog, every horse will produce a horse, and you will not find any horses having puppies or any dogs having foals. You won't find them doing that. Yet that's what evolutionists want us to believe.
Dr. Weisenberg.
Well, you know, the thing that's always puzzled me is, since we definitely know that we have changed organisms through selection, right? That is, farmers have done that, agriculturalists and animal breeders have done that. We have produced the Chihuahua and the Great Dane and the English sheepdog in a microsecond of evolutionary time. Right? So why it should be that humans, through selection of mutants, of variants, all right, why it should be that humans in a flash of time can create all these variants, but natural processes can't create much more variants in billions of years of time, 3.5 billion years, by the actual evidence. So I don't see, you know, that there's a problem. If we have the time, we have the mutations. You wait long enough, trust me, a dog can become something else. Absolutely. It's because, you know something else we know in biology? Deep down inside, when you look at the cells, I said I'm a cell biologist. If you look at the living cells of a dog, a horse, an amoeba, a worm, you look at those individual cells, they're virtually indistinguishable. We're closer to each other than you might think. It's not such a big leap to go, say, from a lizard to a bird. Yep.
And the final word.
Well, the final word is that you have variability in every organism, and so you don't have mutations getting you from a sheepdog to a chihuahua or to a bulldog or to a Great Dane. All you have is breeding. You'll find in every litter of puppies a big one and a small one. You know, the runt of the litter? And if you breed the runts, you'll eventually get chihuahuas. Now that is what evolutionists are taking credit for. They're always taking credit for the created organism and the variability in that created organism. They can't take credit for that. And they cannot hide behind old ages. First of all, these old ages are not provable. They're based on so-called radioisotope dating, which is subjective. It's not objective. And if you want to be scientific, you have to have something that's objective. It has to be calibrated. And these things are not calibrated. And therefore, you can't trust them. And when they start talking about these old ages, that's all speculation. So let's be realistic. Let's see what we have that can be confirmed. Let's stick with the experimental evidence. And what we see experimentally and prospectively with human beings and other organisms on the planet is devolution of remarkably created organisms and structures. And for the evolutionist to get to that, they have to depend upon magic, something in the ages, something in the primitive earth, something like Sibylla or Gia to bring about those miracles. And as scientists, we cannot believe in miracles. We have to believe in experiments, things that we can confirm in our laboratory.
Dr. Weisenberg, would you agree that any of the following icons should be taken out of high school textbooks? Peppered moths, Haeckel's embryos, Darwin's finches, Miller's experiment.
All of those have a historical role. I suspect a lot of the audience is unfamiliar. Can I have the list just to go over quickly? Peppered moths are moths originally studied in England that changed over time because they had collections in museums and they were able to compare. And peppered moths went from a relatively light color morph over time to a darker color morph. That's evolution. That's what evolution means, change. Now, there are debates, and ongoing debates, about what drove that evolution, whether it was bird predation, whether it was pollution. But that's evolution. Haeckel's embryos, he was a lousy artist. He drew some pictures of embryos and tried to compare embryos of different species. And yeah, I mean, you know, this was back in the 1879, I believe. I'm just inventing a date, but that's approximate. Yeah, we can be done with his embryos after over 100 years. Darwin's finches, wonderful example of evolution in the Galapagos Islands. They're absolutely in all the books because, in fact, they exist, and evolution explains why they exist. You can go to the Galapagos Islands, take a tour, see the finches and the turtles. They exist. Great. Great example of evolution. Miller's experiment, that was some experiments that were done trying to generate conditions on the replicate conditions on the early Earth and see if one could generate molecules that had biological importance. And they succeeded by taking a soup and subjecting it to electrical bolts and ultraviolet radiation. They produced some amino acids. That has nothing to do with evolution. That has to do with the origin of life. It is a valid experiment. It does not tell us iota about the origin of life. I would love to give a lecture about the origin of life because it's a wonderfully interesting and diverse topic, but it's nothing to do with evolution.
Dr. Mastropaolo?
Well, I am surprised to hear that it has nothing to do with evolution because it's in all of the books and in the chapter called Evolution. So I presume that it has something to do with evolution. And in fact, you have to bring about this abiogenesis, life from non-life, by magic, by spontaneous generations, which is religion. It's not science. Peppered moths were forged. I told you that in my topic, and I can prove it with journal articles. And one of these journals is called the Journal of Evolutionary Biology. So I assume that you know it's not a creationist journal, right? If it's got a name like Evolutionary Biology. What did Kettlewell do? He captured the moths, he killed them, and he tacked them to the tree in the percentages that he wanted to show evolution. Is that science? That's falsification. That's what it is. That is the anti-science that I was mentioning. These people think that they can put the wool over our eyes by actually falsifying the evidence so that it bears out evolution. That's a scandal. And it's replete with those scandals. Haeckel is not just a bad artist, he's a plagiarist and a forger. And I can show you textbooks today, biology books in the year 2000, that still have Haeckel's embryos, which are known to be one of the most famous fakes in biology. And they refuse to take them out. I was just getting warmed up.
And then, let's see, you have the final word on that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a giant conspiracy. I will not defend textbooks. I'm writing one now myself, and I got to tell you, the textbooks suck. The stuff gets into a textbook, and it's stuck in there for decades, because that's what textbook writers do. They just copy from other textbooks. So I will not defend textbooks. Evolution, and I read from Nature, that one issue of Nature, and I read some of the examples. We're not talking Darwin's finches. We're talking thousands of biologists, thousands, traveling the earth, studying the organisms of the earth, studying their DNA structure, digging out fossils. These are hard-working, intelligent, dedicated scientists. They are not criminals. They are not conspirators. They are people trying to understand the world around them. And that's what they do, and that's why evolution is established in the textbooks, because it's supported by these thousands of hard-working scientists.
Dr. Mastropaolo, since evolution requires long periods to occur, if the universe were demonstrably young, the theory would die out. What is the best evidence, in your opinion, that the universe is not old?
Well, I guess the best evidence, in my opinion, is the evidence that Dr. Weisenberg has told you about. Here it is. This is the estimated age of the Earth during radioisotope years, since the discovery of radioisotopes. Notice it goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, until it finally becomes reliable. Does that seem to you like a valid, reliable measurement? Doesn't seem to me like that. If I see anything like that in my laboratory, I throw it out. I say that this doesn't this doesn't measure what I think it's supposed to measure. I throw it out. If you want to go according to calibrated radioisotopes, then this is what you get. The age of the Earth with calibrated radioisotopes is 3,868 years. That's not very old. And that would mean that the Egyptians built the pyramids in outer space 832 years before the Earth was born. How do you like that? Is that science? I try to show this. Here's a pyramid, and I try to show it in outer space. I worked in aerospace. We engineered our fingers to the bone trying to figure out how to get things up in orbit. And if the Egyptians did that 832 years before the Earth was born, a pyramid, I can't tell you how many dollars it took for 1 pound to get it up into orbit. This is not science. This is religion. And that's what you have when you're depending upon old ages, as they say in their textbooks. It's worthless. He's quite right. What's in the textbook under evolution is worthless. It is falsified. It is forged. It is fraudulent. It is a big confidence game. And why? You know, he said, is there a conspiracy? There's no conspiracy. It's money. Money. Do you know how much the Dino Bird forgery got for the forgers? $80,000. That's not bad for using a glue pot. Just glue together a dinosaur and a bird. $80,000, that's not bad at all. And do you know how much there is in the textbook industry? Do you want to guess? $1 million? $100 million? $1 billion? $24 billion. That's the kind of business that you have in textbooks in the United States. 24 billion. There is money in evolution. There's no money in creation.
We're over by a minute. If you'd like to take an additional minute.
I sure wish I had a slice of that money. You know, I took a class. I took a class some years ago up to the Catskills where there was with a group there where there were some fossil beds. And one of the things we looked at, we climbed a little hill. When we got to the top of this hill, there was a coral reef. You can walk on top. If you've ever done scuba diving, you know what a coral reef looks like. And there, smack dab in the middle of New York State, is a tropical coral reef. You can go visit it. Now, how long do you think how did it get there? I mean, come on. It didn't get there overnight. All right, I don't know, suppose, God said, I think I'll drop a coral reef down the middle of New York State. No, it got there through continental drift. It's a fossilized reef, and it got there, I don't know, how many millions of years? 100 million years, 200 million years, 500 million years. You'll have to go back. I'm not an expert on it, but this is a very old Earth relative to what he's using.
And Dr. Mastropaolo, final word.
I would like you to know that I played on 42 acres of land in the Adirondack Mountains, which is not too far from where my learned colleague is talking about. I recently went back to that land. There's not one robin, not one chipmunk, not one squirrel, not one finch, not one woodchuck, not one fox, not one deer, not one butterfly, not one milkweed. All of the flora and fauna that I played amongst when I was a boy are gone. In how long? 50 years. Only 50 years. And you would not recognize that place. I could hardly recognize it. It was completely changed from when I was a boy. I'm not just talking to you about things that are theoretic. I'm talking to you about investigating these things like a scientist does. I went back to a place that I knew every square inch of as a boy, and it was completely changed. Lakes that I remember with a mask, looking and having 150 feet of visibility, and I could only see 10 feet 3 years ago. Completely changed. Fish that used to be delicious to eat, we put on the table and we could not eat them. They tasted so terrible. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is change of a particular kind. It's called devolution. It goes from a beautiful creation to something that is much, much less. And time destroys beautiful creations. And human beings accelerate that destruction.
And that's, and then here's a question for Dr. Weisenberg, and if you would like to take an additional minute, because I think we went over on that, feel free to do so. By what natural law does life arise from non-life?
By what natural law does life arise from non-life? I wish I could answer that. As I've emphasized, there are many theories about the origin of life. Some involve RNA molecules, some involve minerals such as clay. Current theory now, there's a lot of people excited about undersea vents and high temperature organisms on the bottom of the ocean, and whether they could have been the key. I'm sorry. You do find reference to the origin of life in an evolution textbook and in a biology textbook, because they throw that in as sometimes a sentence or a paragraph. But it is not what evolution's about. It's just not. So I wish I could answer your question. I tell my students, when occasionally this comes up, that people want to question evolution and talk about creationism, and I say, look, if you want to believe in a creation and it's on a scientific level, if you want to believe, say, that the first living thing, the first cell, was an act of creation, of divine creation, as a scientist, I'm not going to give you a hard time, because I don't have an alternative. I don't have any evidence. I wasn't around 3.5 billion years ago. No scientists were around 3.5 billion years ago. And the fossil record is pathetic 3.5 billion years ago. Those little microorganisms hardly left any residue to study. It's a few organic compounds. So we don't know about the origin of life. And if you want to believe in a creative God and you want to accept science, that's your out. That's your way out. Because I honestly can't tell you how life emerged, how it, quotes, was created or came into being. I can only tell you that on a scientific point of view, based upon over 150 years of scientific study by tens and tens of thousands of scientists, that evolution is what works. And, he can rant and rave about it being some kind of evil money-making conspiracy, but that's the bottom line. It works. It's what we use on a day-to-day basis as scientists to understand the world around them. I'm sorry that he only sees the degradation of the world around him. I was driving in today. I saw some bright yellow flowers, a whole field of bright yellow flowers. Anybody know what those are? Coming up? They're a lesser celandine. Lesser celandine is actually a European flower, but it's found a niche here, and it's spreading like crazy. In the springtime, it blooms, leaves beautiful fields of green, of yellow flowers, yellow and green. And that's evolution. Some things come, some things go. Right? Some things are better able to survive and reproduce. They grow and spread. Other things, less so. And I watch in my backyard also. I see changes. Right? I see some plants and animals disappear. I see others take their place. We may become extinct. I suspect we'll be replaced, maybe by cockroaches. Pretty good riddance, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, enough.
Well, I'd like to mention that the daffodils, or whatever the flowers are, that are finding a niche, those flowers were created. How do we know that? Because we try to find evolution anywhere in the universe, and what we find is it is absent. Nothing evolves. Everything devolves. And if we find the spread of a flower, what that means is its original design permitted it the variability to succeed in that particular environment. That is what we have in the original variability of created organisms. We have variability that permits them to be, if we breed them, Chihuahuas or Great Danes or Shetland ponies or Belgian horses. It's all in the variability of each organism. Now, if you want to see creation at work, all you have to do is look at 1 millimeter on the bottom side of a milkweed leaf. That will hatch in 3 days to a caterpillar that has 6 simple eyes. And when it spins a chrysalis, it will hatch into a butterfly which has 12,000 simple eyes. You can't get that from evolution. You can't go from 6 to 12,000. You can't go from a pedestrian to a flyer. You can't have something flying at 24 miles an hour because it has 1 million scales on its wings, all of which had to be specified. They could not occur by chance, because by chance it wouldn't work. And it has to be able to fly not only 24 miles an hour, but over a 3,000-mile migration with all of the navigational equipment on board and in the size of the head of a pin. That is creation. That is in the original design. And that you can see experimentally in the space of 60 days. You don't have to wait a so-called million or billion years for it to occur. And likewise, the Arctic fox. It changes its fur color from gray in the spring when it matches the tundra to white in the wintertime when it matches the snow. And it doesn't take 1 billion years to do that, because if it did, it wouldn't survive. It has to do it white with the first snow. And when the snow melts, it's got to be gray. Otherwise, it doesn't survive. And what is that? That is the variability that is built into the original organism so that it can survive. It cannot survive if it depends on evolution. It can only survive if its survival mechanisms are built into the organism. And that's the way we are. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Okay, let me just, before Dr. Weisenberg has an opportunity to respond on the third part of that question, let me just say that I only have one more question because I wanted to divide it evenly. We started with Dr. Weisenberg. I have one more question for Dr. Mastropaolo and then the three-part. And then we will give both 2-minute opportunities. So we are coming to the conclusion. It's not a hopeless situation, just one more question. But I do want Dr. Weisenberg to have the last word on that previous question.
Well, I think the response that I would make to the comment is that, we know that mutations occur. That's a scientific fact. There's no, you're not denying, I hope, that mutations occur. Now, I know creationists will say, oh, they can only be harmful. Oh, they can only be harmful. Well, then along comes a mutation, for example, for antibiotic resistance, which you can produce in a laboratory. That experiment has been done many times. All right? So, given the realities of the reproductive cycle, for example, we're not going to, and we do get sports. We do get mutations appearing from time to time in domestic species. One theory, for example, the origin of corn is that it was a spontaneous mutant from a plant. So, from a plant ancestor. So, you can't deny mutations exist. You can't deny that occasionally those mutations have beneficial effects in terms of survival. How can you deny it? It's an observed fact.
Okay, the final question for Dr. Mastropaolo. You claimed that these falsehoods are in contemporary science textbooks, Piltdown and Nebraska Man, Pangenesis, Darwin, Lamarckianism. Can you name one modern textbook currently published and marketed that claims these as evidence for evolution?
I could show you a slide that shows ape men, and it gives you absolutely no reference. So if you want a reference, you can go to Piltdown. If you want a reference, you can go to Hesperopithecus Harold Cookii, which was used in the Scopes trial, and it was based upon one tooth. And it wasn't an ape tooth, and it wasn't a human tooth. Can you guess what kind it was? A peccary, an extinct pig's tooth. Now, I defy any evolutionist or any artist to draw a picture of me and my wife, which is what they drew, this Hesperopithecus Harold Cookii and his wife in this primitive environment. I defy you to draw a picture of me and my wife from any kind of tooth. But that was what was done. And I want to point out to you that the Piltdown man was an orangutan jaw and a human skull, and they were both dyed the same color, and the teeth were filed down to resemble human flatware. And that was kept in the museum, the British Museum of Natural History, for 40 years, from 1912 to 1952. And when I was in school, I was told that was the missing link. And when I was in school, we were told that Haeckel's embryos were more evidence to convince us. And when I was in school, we were also being led to believe that Kettleworth's peppered moths were more evidence for evolution. And do you know what? All of those things are plausible falsehoods that are pulled back and then reintroduced as soon as people forget. And I object to that. I had my life changed because I was educated falsely to believe evolution. I used to be an evolutionist. And when I found out that it was all speculation, all falsification, I was put out. Can you tell by the tone of my voice that I was a little upset? I think that's the biggest scandal that we've had in science of the last 140 years. And is Darwin an individual that is silly? Absolutely.
Demonstrated fact. You yourself can go back and look at the collections in the museums, and you discover that they did change. But we see lots of changes in organisms around us over time, and they're recorded in the fossil record. Fossil record's history. It's our record of history of life on Earth. You know, another thing I find really astonishing, how many here believe George Washington was the first president of the United States? Raise your hands if you believe George Washington was the Okay, well, that's some of you just lazy. How many here believe that that's a falsity? That that's not true? That that evidence is made up? Well, not too many. But look, the evidence we have for evolution, which is rocks, which is DNA sequences, which is mathematical models and computer models, that evidence is far superior in magnitude and amount and quality to the evidence that we have that George Washington was actually the first president of the United States. What we have is a few documents, some paintings, right? Who knows that that stuff's real? It could all have been faked. Faked the whole thing. There was no George Washington. Well, that's the kind of situation, you know, they would try and put the evolutionary biologists in. I'm sorry. We've got, I brought that those articles from Nature, one issue of Nature, half dozen articles in one journal from 1 week. Multiply that by thousands each week. That's how strong evolution is. Thank you.
Well, there's not one experiment. And I want to mention that George Washington, we all believe, was the first president of the United States because we have historic evidence, primary historic evidence, evidence that was written by men who were alive when George Washington was alive. They weren't liars. And the reason that you can tell that they weren't liars was because they all confirm each other on when Washington was alive, which battles he fought, how he fought them, and some were from the diaries of the men who were in his army. That's very well historically documented. evolution has no historic documentation. Evolution has no history. Evolution has nothing written down. And when my learned colleague talks about antibiotic resistance, are you going to believe that antibiotic resistance occurred in the same individual in a hospital and that is evolution? Or are you going to believe instead that that organism had built into its original design the variability to resist that particular kind of antibiotic? It was built into the original design. There is no evolution taking place with bacteria. There are only bacteria surviving who are resistant to that antibiotic because they were the variants that had in their design that kind of attribute. That's why they survived. All the others were killed off because they had no competition. They multiplied, and now you have a population of resistant bacteria. They didn't evolve. It was from their original variability in their design. So I hope that you see that these are specious arguments, and I hope that you paid attention to what I said about peppered moths. There is nothing about peppered moths that shows evolution. That was all falsified. The moths were captured, they were killed, and they were pinned to the tree trunks, and then the pictures were taken. That is not science. That is forgery. That is the greatest amount of confusion that you can sow in science. It's the greatest bias. And that's what I call anti-science. So that's what I put up on the slide. Evolution is anti-science, it's religion, it's anti-life, and it needs to be expunged.
Okay, and now it's time for the final response from our participants. Perhaps before we have that response, perhaps we could just give a hand of appreciation for two minutes, Dr. Weisenberg. And if you need 2.5, he went over a little bit.
Oh, that's all right. I keep forgetting this thing is, I suppose I carry that. I think the obvious thing that needs to be examined here, as I said from the beginning, is where this creationist movement, if I can call it that, arises from. Because we all know it doesn't arise from science. He's tried to make it sound like it arises from science. And he's entitled to his opinion. You know, and it's an oddity in these debates because up here on the platform we stand before you as equals, as it should be. But standing behind me, in my point of view, is the hard work of tens of thousands of scientists over 150 or so years, standing behind creationist point of view, my colleague, are pretty much a handful of people who believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible. Now, you know, he can claim that there are falsehoods. He can cite the pepper moth story all he wants. It's a non-issue in evolutionary biology. All right, we move well beyond the poor pepper moth, and it was pinned. And by the way, the pepper moth was pinned to the tree for illustrative purposes. The fact of the matter still remains that the pepper moths changed over time, and we're still debating why it changed, why they changed. But that's an observed fact. So where are we then? I mean, you know, are we going to erase from the textbooks the organizing principle that's been used for 150 years by scientists? I don't think so. It ain't going to happen. As I said, God herself could not cause scientists to change the way they do science. It works. Evolutionary biology works. It explains and predicts the pattern of life on Earth. It allows us to organize the fossils into logical sequences. The physicists come to the biologists and say, oh, we can take those rocks for you. And they do, and then we say, yeah, that makes sense. That allows us to organize these fossils in a nice organized way. I use the George Washington analogy or argument because, it's important for you to appreciate, if you want to understand this, the amount of material we're talking about. I went about 5 years ago, there was a dinosaur fossil exhibit. It was a traveling exhibit of fossils, the biggest collection of dinosaur fossils ever put together, traveled. It filled the old convention center. Filled it with fossils collected from around the world. That's a small fraction of the data. Small fraction. So you can, we got some evidence that George Washington, I believe also that George Washington was the first president because I don't think all those documents were forged. I think, in fact, the logical conclusion from looking at the totality of the evidence is that George Washington was the first president. And I accept that because the totality of the evidence, the logic of it makes sense. And that's what you have to do. You can listen to my colleague say that it's against the laws of physics, which is certainly not true. But he's not answered the first question that I raised, or the first point. He's not provided an alternative framework that allows us to predict, explain, analyze, understand the diversity of life on Earth. Until they do so on the creationist side, they will get nowhere in the scientific community. And of course, they will not be capable of doing that because it's the nature of the creationist argument that it does not predict or explain. Everything is just an act of creation. Thank you.
And I'm glad that you did take advantage of a little extra time there. And Dr. Mastropaolo.
I would like to point out to you once more that scientists do not falsify evidence, and that peppered moth data was falsified. It was forged. And when you say that pepper moths change, yes, they do change, but they don't reflect evolutionary change. So, and you do not, as a scientist, falsify the evidence. You never do that. I was trained in my doctoral work and so on to be scrupulously honest. And if I wasn't, I was disqualifying myself as a scientist. That we have to keep in mind. I'd like to show you what we have for, this is a photograph, and you can see this is the negative. I'm calling this reality because we all recognize this, and this is evolution. You see the chimney is here. Evolution shows it at the opposite extreme. You see there's snow on the lawn. It's shown as white in reality, and evolution shows it as black. Evolution is always giving you the opposite of what we have in reality. When can we believe evolution? This is when we can believe it. When we see this, then evolution may be true. Anybody seen that? I don't think so. Then why do we have evolutionists always mentioning, have you heard me during this entire talk about God or the Bible or literal translations or Genesis or anything like that? I have stuck strictly to science, strictly to experiments, strictly to things like objectivity, like calibration, like picking valid measurements, like picking measurements that are reliable. I have stuck to science, and I've been holding evolution accountable for their unscientific, magical, religious kinds of falsifications. And you want to know why they do what they do? I think it's because of something like this. This ant says, our engineers could never build that, the skyline of New York. What do we tell the people? And what's the queen ant say? Tell it evolved over billions of years from common ancestors by natural selection. Does that explain it? They want to know what is unknowable. They want to know who created this or that organism. If it's unknowable, then we should be honest enough to say we don't know. Scientifically, we don't know. But scientifically, we also know that it did not evolve. And we should not lie and say that it evolved just because we need some reason to be brilliant like this queen ant. She doesn't have the mentality. She doesn't have the intelligence to design this. She doesn't have the size. She's the wrong size. And so are we the wrong size to find out about the nanoengineering in all of the organisms that are in our biosphere. We're the wrong size. We can't even see it with our microscopes because of the frequencies of light that limit what we can see. We're also not the right intelligence. We're not smart enough. It requires superhuman intelligence to understand life forms. And we don't have that intelligence. And we should be honest enough to admit it. And we should not consider that excuse for making up and falsifications that we have in these so-called theories of evolution. They're not theories. They are fabrications. And they threaten our entire biosphere. And that's why I say it needs to be expunged. It's anti-science. It's anti-life. It's killing our biosphere. And it's killing human beings. We need to get rid of it. It is the greatest scandal in science of the last 150 years. If anything, it's the greatest scandal for 2,500 years. We go back to Anaximander and Aristotle, who invented it.
Thank you. Let me just direct your attention. Some of you maybe are interested about Skilton House. I invite you to look at the paragraph on the back page. Let me just read one statement. It says, "We are mindful that the teaching of evolution dominates many secular institutions, but we also believe that the Lord Jesus Christ, as God the Son and the Creator in human flesh, is both King of the universe and Maker of all." And we have two special offers if you'd like to purchase these books for $2 in the hallway. And also, this is my book, Jehovah Jesus, pointing to Jesus Christ as the Creator, tracing various parts through the both Testaments. And let us conclude with a second round of applause for our speakers. And I believe there are refreshments available, and you're also invited to come forward and